something very interesting has been happening in the Kengan Omega manga as of lately. Now, if you're asking, okay, what the hell is this? Well, the worm heads in Kengan Omega have had the highest tier of strength for fighters that we have really ever seen in the entire series. Looking specifically at Edward Wu, the first wormhead we see in action, he is somewhat overwhelming in strength. I don't think I need to say much about Edward because I think most of the Kengan community kind of, recognize his strength for the most part. And in Kengan vs. Purgatory, Mutemba compares Nico, who's another wormhead, to Edward when it comes to strength and gauging which one is a greater threat. With Edward back then in Kengan vs. Purgatory possibly being stronger than Nico. However, Edward is able to take care of a character like Ryan, who's relative to Oma, quite easily, it would seem. And for a long time, Edward has kind of been one of the standards to gauge all the other wormheads by. And I think that remains true to this day. I think most wormheads have to somewhat be within his level of strength. But this doesn't just go for Edward Wu. Even characters that are relative to the wormhead strength have been quite impressive as well. Looking at a few of these characters, one of them is Fei Wangfang. Zaiji compares Fei Wangfang to Yan and Edward in his flashback when he said he's second fiddle to them. Right? Then we have, of course, Gaio Mukaku, where Shen Wulong said that only a select few people around him could even deal with him, with Yan being specifically name dropped, who is the leader of the Wormheads and is a Wormhead. And then I'm going to add a controversial person, which is Zaiji, but I'll save that for another day. For now, just know that this is probably a controversial pick. What's interesting is that we've had very few of these types of characters that are relative to the Wormheads, but not really a Wormhead. And all of them have been quite impressive, being able to essentially bully most of the cast that were high tiers in like Kengan Ashura. So Fei's complete domination of Wakatsuki in a contest of strength, something that Wakatsuki specializes in, is absolutely amazing. Gaio Mukaku basically striking fear into Oma, him not wanting to even fight him again, trying to get away from him for the most part, is also quite impressive. And so you get a sense that this tier of strength is very high regarded, and it would seem to be that some characters haven't really reached that tier yet. However, I think that's changing. Now, the main reason why I think it's changing is because of the recent fight between Nico versus Setsuna. I think this fight is showing that the rest of the verse has been essentially catching up to the Wormhead tier. But before we get into the Wormhead tier itself, I want to talk about the general power-ups of most characters. And by most characters, I mean one character specifically, which is Canada. Canada has made a huge boom in improvement and in strength, being able to, I think, fight Hatsumi high diff. I think that was a high diff fight, because the difference between Hatsumi and Canada winning was literally a few seconds in which Hatsumi had to essentially recall everything that had happened and only manages to get out of Canada's spell, you could say, in the nick of time. But Canada's showcase was solid because he basically showed that he could go up against really anyone who could sense the inception of intent or had some foresight. In fact, he does particularly well against them. And so I'm using Canada as the standard because I think majority of the verse is getting stronger, and Canada is just one of the ways we can see this. We know Koga is currently training, getting stronger, learning the Nico style. Ryuki will also get stronger as well. He's probably going to do some training, especially with the recent thing with Shen. But characters have been improving for a while now. I want people to remember Edward died 2 years ago in universe time. So it's been 2 years since we've basically been, or at least in the Kengan universe, they've seen someone as strong as Edward. That gives a lot of time for characters to improve and to get stronger. Which brings us to Setsuna versus Nico. And I want to talk about a specific quote that Setsuna made to Nico that illustrates the point a lot. And it is in, of course, the latest chapter of Kengan Omega. I think it's 245, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm going to read Setsuna's part of the dialogue only and stop at a certain point. So here it goes. You remind me of the other Nico right now. He died fighting my master while still wounded from his fight with you. How does it feel to lose because you couldn't fight at full strength? You reap what you sow. Your confidence was your undoing. Now, this is Setsuna essentially basically saying, I've won. It's the huge speech that most characters sort of give before the defeat of another character. Although Setsuna, he doesn't quite win. But notice what Setsuna is actually saying here, because it's very important to understand what Setsuna is saying here. Setsuna is saying Nico will lose because he can't go at full power. And so if you were reading this fight up until this point, you see a very big change in Setsuna's attitude the moment he lands his kick. And the reason he does this, and I'll probably have to do an analysis of this fight later on, is because once he's landed that kick, he's confident that Nico can't use his full strength, and thus guaranteeing Setsuna's victory. What this implies is that the only real way Nico could beat Setsuna is if he used his full strength. And that's very, very, very big. Because that means that essentially Setsuna is either at the tier of basically the Wormhead, or he's relative to people like Gaiomukaku and Fei Wangfang, who are essentially relative to the people who are the Wormheads. Because Nico needs, again, emphasis on the fact that he needs this power to beat Setsuna. And we even see him say he will take the risk. He basically uses either its advanced Fallen Demon, even though it's risky for him to use it. He does it anyway, because I think even Nico himself realizes the predicament that he's in, that he will probably lose if he doesn't use his full strength. And so I think this is kind of the beginning of this idea rearing its head, that the rest of the verse, that some characters are going to catch up to the Wormhead tier. I know it's pretty obvious that this was going to happen eventually, but I think people didn't expect it to start with, Kiryu Setsuna. But yeah, that's the entire video. It's a very interesting topic that I wanted to cover, and soon I'll have to do my theory on the Wu clan. Essentially, that's coming out soon. So hey, if you've listened up till this point in the video, thank you very much. And yeah, that's really about it. Don't forget to like, sub, all that fun stuff, and until next time, take it easy.